Astrology, horoscopes, and the non-existent zodiac. If you've looked at other videos in this short series on this webpage, then you'll know that an astrological birth chart looks at more than just the sun sign. Newspaper columns, media columns describe the totality of human nature into 12 groups of people, suggesting that out of 6.9 billion people, there's only 12 types of human being, and all of those types of human being are exactly the same, and the same types of things will happen to vast numbers of people every day. People, even because of a misuse of language, describe themselves as a sign of the zodiac. They say, what's your sign? I'm a Taurus. What sign are you? I'm a Gemini. What do we mean by this? Well, when we talk about the person as a sign, you're a Taurus, you're a Gemini, you're a Cancer, you're a Leo, you're a Virgo, what we mean is the sun was moving through that sign at the time you were born. What does that mean? Well, obviously we know that the sun sits in the middle of the solar system and we revolve around the sun. Okay? We live in a heliocentric solar system. But from our viewpoint, the sun looks as if it goes around us because it seems to us, because the earth tilts, that the sun rises and falls. We know, of course, that the sun doesn't move. It's us moving around it. But astrology is a language of symbols that describes subjective experience. And from our subjective perspective, it looks as if the sun moves around us. Now, the path that the sun traces as it arcs through the sky is called the ecliptic. And what astrologers do is we look at that arc through the sky and we divide it into sections. Those sections have a particular quality and we symbolize those qualities with the zodiac. For example, you know from Doppler shift that when something comes towards you it's high-pitched and when something goes away from you it's low-pitched. So a vehicle with a siren goes as it passes. It doesn't go the other way. You don't get something going as it goes away. So likewise then, we know that something coming towards us has a certain quality or tone. Something moving away from us has a certain quality or tone. And you can see this, for example, if you live not necessarily on the equator, but certainly north or south of the equator, you'll experience this with hours of daylight. The beginning of the year, it might seem that the sun is very small and pale, and then as the year progresses, the sun gets brighter and brighter and brighter, full strength sun at the height of summer, the days are long and warm, and then gradually the sun's light will diminish, and you'll get winter's longest night, and then you go past the rebirth moment, it seems, when the cycle begins again. So we can divide the year into summer and winter. But if we divide that summer and winter into intermediate sections, then we have autumn and spring as well. And you can divide autumn and spring and summer and winter into a further 3 sections of beginning, establishment and preparation for the next. So spring has its launch and then it settles into itself, and then there's the end of spring, which is like a prelude to summer, which heralds the beginning of summer. And then the establishment of summer, and then the end of summer leads into the beginning of autumn, and so on. And if you look at seasons like that, suddenly you find that instead of just 2, summer and winter, or 4, there are now 12. And each one of these has a particular tone or quality or sense. And those tones or qualities or senses were described by the ancient Greeks with a circle of animals, which is what the word zodiac means, a circle of animals. And those symbols describe the qualities of this cycle. All right. Now, that is looking at the solar cycle, the cycle of the sun. And of course, we know the sun doesn't move, we move around it. But it seems to us as if the sun moves around us. So it also seems to us that as the year progresses, the sun appears to occupy a different portion of the sky. It's not actually like that at all. It's us moving around the sun. We're occupying a different portion of the sky. But that's not how we describe it in our language. You know, we don't say, for example, if you were looking at a purple-coloured highlighter marker, you wouldn't say, here is a highlighter marker, one of the constituent components of which is that it emits light in the spectrum of purple. That's the accurate description. What we say is it's a purple marker. And to say that the purple marker is somehow intrinsic in its identity is inaccurate in terms of physics, because the purple light is the light that's emitted from it, and that means that it absorbs all the other colours. So its identity is actually every colour but purple. So our language isn't necessarily accurate, and a lot of the language of media columns and horoscope columns isn't accurate either, because human beings tend to communicate by generalizing, deleting, and distorting. So instead of saying, you know, the book which reflects blue light, we say, can you pass the blue book? Likewise then, instead of saying to a person, you were born when the sun was moving through the sign of, and that suggests that a certain part of your characteristic seems like this and has these kind of dynamics to it, the person is told, you're a Taurus. And that language, you're a Taurus, sounds like that's describing what a person is. But that's not what the astrologer means, however it's the language they use. Now, having a misrepresentation in language is okay. Well, actually it's not okay, but it's common, right? But what happens if that person then goes on to run a small course, or teach an enduring long-term course, or write some books which apparently become popular and then people buy, or even becomes one of the people who are published on a weekly or daily basis in periodicals or online. And what you'd find then is that person's students or delegates on a course or readers would then take on this language, which is actually a misrepresentation, and then talk in that language themselves. So this kind of erroneous rumour mushrooms and grows. And it's like a bad photocopy that's being repeated and repeated and repeated by people, you know, exponentially. It just goes out. A bit like we know that the ancient Greeks estimated the circumference of the earth. If you look at 13th century Bibles, you'll find a picture of God making the world, and he's holding a ball. There's a clue in that. He's holding a ball, God making the world. 250 years before Columbus, the artist knew that God thought the world was round. So when Columbus sailed over the edge, they weren't going over the edge of the world, they were going over the edge of uncharted waters. Sailors are notoriously superstitious, or maritimers of old were superstitious. A lot of them couldn't swim, they were press ganged onto ships, so they prayed to Neptune at every available moment and Poseidon to give them safe passage and protect them from the sirens that would sing on the rocks. So a 19th century American author wrote in a fictional account of Columbus's life that people thought the world was flat. That rumour spread, and I was taught it as a child as a fact, even though there's so much historical evidence that shows that that wasn't the case whatsoever at all. Likewise then, the idea that all astrologers believe in fate, or all astrologers believe that there are only 12 kinds of people, or all astrologers think that people are signs, is as much of an error in terms of a meme or rumour as the idea of medieval people that everyone thought the world was flat. But such is the strength and power of rumours that it becomes the dialogue of the moment. And so when you read these things, what I tend to do is when someone says to me, oh, I'm a Scorpio, I go, okay, so what you mean is your sun isn't Scorpio, which then allows me to think, what about the rest of you? You know, that might describe your general characteristic, that might describe your approach to creativity, but what about your unconscious, what your feelings, your values, your perceptions, your philosophy, the way you communicate, all those other things that are symbolised by the other planets in astrology, which form the matrix kind of network of various components of personality, which produce a sense of what a person is at a certain moment in time, in a certain circumstance, in a certain environment, because we're all situated in terms of the time and space where we find ourselves. If this is starting to sound a little bit complicated, I'd strongly recommend look at the other 7 short videos describing what astrology is and what a birth chart is. There's about 7 of them, and they're all quite short, only between 10 to 15 minutes each, so have a look. Or if you want to find out more, you can write to me at astrology@davidryan.co.uk, or look at the website, which is www.davidryan.co.uk. So this zodiac then doesn't exist. The idea that your sign, this kind of thing of a sign that isn't describing the person, it's describing something in the sky, something in space, and it's a portion of the ecliptic, which also means then that it's describing something that doesn't exist anyway. The ecliptic doesn't exist. It's the sun's apparent path around the earth. It appears that way. It's a philosophical construct. I mean, you've never heard on the news, yes, Bob, space shuttle Challenger took off from Cape Canaveral today at 7:52 local time, smashed a big hole through Sagittarius at 7:57, so we're all quite excited about that. We believe when it has its re-entry 11 days from now, it'll demolish half of Taurus. All these space missions that go up to space stations and up to the moon since the 1960s, none of them have ever kind of crashed through the zodiac, made big holes in this zodiac that surrounds the Earth, because the zodiac isn't there. And the zodiac we refer to is not the star constellations either. When a human brain looks at the billions of dots of stars in the sky, it's overwhelming. And so it's not a surprise that the only way a human brain can make sense of it is to weave them into patterns and shapes. And then, of course, the ancient Greeks gave a lot of those patterns and shapes meaning, and astronomers continue that tradition now. But when horoscopic astrologers just talk about a planet being in Virgo or a planet being in Sagittarius, they're not referring to the star constellations. They're referring to this measuring unit of the ecliptic. So for us, the zodiac doesn't just suggest qualities of season. It actually is our ruler. Each sign has 30 degrees, and the circle itself is 360 degrees. So we plot the positions of planets as they move around the zodiac, and that enables us to be able to draw them or represent them in our charts. So the positions of the planets is literal, and then the meaning that we attribute to that is allegorical. Alright? Not a good idea to mix that up. So for example, when we say that someone's Venus is conjunct their moon, we don't mean that Venus and the moon are banging into each other. That's not what we mean. Because the moon is there, for example, and you're the point of observation, the camera on the Earth, and Venus is millions of miles behind the moon. Right? They're not touching at all. They're millions of miles away. But from the viewpoint of observation, if the moon is there and Venus is here, or rather, if we put it the other way around, if Venus is here and then the faster moving moon comes along and it moves across like that, at this moment, there, it looks as if they're touching each other, because it's like an eclipse, and then the moon continues on its journey. But they're millions of miles apart. If you looked at them as a plan view, there's a huge gap, right? They're not actually touching at all. It just seems that way to us. It appears. So horoscopic astrology is about appearances, how things appear to us. And as human beings, what we tend to do is we configure subjective landscapes of reality neurologically in our brain. We don't necessarily respond to life as it is or people for who they are. We often respond to the narrative of what we believe them to be, which may or may not be true. Epictetus said 2,000 years ago, "We are not troubled by things, but rather by the opinions we have of things." And with that to contemplate, I shall leave you here because we've run out of time for this short video clip. But thank you, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. and I'll happily explain a little bit more about the illusion of the zodiac and how we use that in subjective experience of horoscopic astrology. Thank you for your time.